When we talk of reimagining India, one can talk about it at two levels. First, what kind of India would we like to have? What should be the nature of its people? What should be the state of the environment? What should be the kind of education that is given to our citizens? What should be the nature of health care? What should be the nature of our democracy itself? What should be the material needs of people in our country, in our society? That's one level. At the other level, we can ask what kind of laws, what kind of institutions, what kind of systems need to be put in place to imagine and to achieve the kind of India that we want. So I'll talk about it at both levels. First, we must understand that our Constitution provides us with a fairly good model of imagining the kind of India that our Constitution makers had imagined. So they imagined a democratic society, a pluralistic society, a society which would be driven by scientific temper, a society where people would have various fundamental rights, and a society where various institutions such as the Election Commission, the Comptroller and Auditor General, a free judiciary, a media, etc. would be put in place to help us achieve those ends. But even though the Constitution makers did a very good job of imagining India and even putting in place the kind of systems and institutions that were needed to achieve that kind of India, I think some of the things still feel short of what should be done, what needs to be done. So if we try and imagine the kind of people that we want, well, the Constitution imagined a pluralistic society driven by scientific temper, but it did not quite imagine that, in fact, diversity of people is an asset of society rather than being a hindrance or an impediment for achieving anything. So, what we need to imagine a little further is a society which is very diverse, not just in terms of ethnicity, language, religion, but in every other possible way. Because just as biodiversity is a great asset of society, human diversity of every kind is also a great asset for society. Secondly, while the Constitution imagined and spoke about the need to inculcate scientific temper, it did not speak so much about critical thinking or about developing an understanding of an empathy towards other people, other beings, and to the environment in general. So one of the things that we would like to imagine further in our society would be that education should be driven with the objective of, number one, creating people who have a very highly developed sense of critical thinking, where they are able to question everything and arrive at their own conclusions on the basis of reasoning, discussion, thinking, etc. And for that, of course, having and inculcating a scientific temper is absolutely essential. Beyond that, we need education where people are sensitized, made aware of and sensitized towards other people, towards other beings, towards the environment in general. If we just focus education on these two broad objectives, that is critical thinking and scientific temper on the one hand, and then empathy for other people, other beings, environment in general, then we would have created human beings who are not only who love each other, live in harmony with each other, live in harmony with nature, but are also empowered because of their highly developed sense of critical thinking and scientific temper. They are empowered to do and to learn any kind of skill that is required. So far as material needs of people are concerned, our constitution did not say very much, except saying that we must strive to reduce economic inequality among people. It did not quite talk about the need for everybody to have a dignified job. That is an essential need of human beings, and that's something which should have been built and should be built as a fundamental right in our constitution. That is, everyone has a fundamental right to get a dignified job. Of course, the Supreme Court, while interpreting Article 21, the right to life and liberty, said that it does not just mean the right to animal life or liberty, it means the right to lead a dignified life and everything that is necessary to lead a dignified life. And one of the most essential things of a dignified life is a dignified job. So that's something that our society definitely needs to have. The Constitution doesn't talk much about health care, but it is absolutely essential for a dignified life to have proper and reasonable basic health care available to everybody without having to pay for it. So, free basic health care and health services should be available to every citizen in the country. And here there is another thing which is important. See, healthcare unfortunately has come to be understood in terms of allopathic medicine and institutions which are largely driven by the profit motive, by pharmaceutical companies, by doctors who want to earn money and who want to maximize their income, etc. We need to get out of this mentality, and we need to develop healthcare systems which are holistic in nature. There are many things in our earlier systems of medicine, Ayurveda, naturopathy, etc., which are very, very good, which need to be a part of the whole healthcare and medical curriculum, education and understanding. The Constitution imagined that we would be a democracy, but it did not spell out what kind of democracy. It felt that we need to be a representative democracy, whereas now it's well known and well understood that there are many ways of direct democracy which have been practiced, which have been put in place in many other countries of the world. For example, we can have initiatives and referendums by which people can directly say what is the kind of law or the system that they want to put in place, and if a sufficient number of people sign an initiative to that effect, then a referendum can be held to decide whether a majority of the people want that or not. There are other ways of achieving more participatory democracy. First is, of course, to decentralize power so that you can have as much town hall meetings, gram sabhas, etc., in which decisions can be taken by the physical presence of all the stakeholders of that community. We need to move from representative democracy to participatory democracy. Even within representative democracy, unfortunately, we have adopted what is called the first past the post system at two levels. That is, when we elect our representatives, we elect only one person who got the maximum votes, even if he gets only 25% of the vote, so long as others have got less than him. So even if the other candidates put together get 75% of the votes, the one who gets 25%, provided he is the highest vote getter, becomes the sole representative. Thereafter, when we elect a government, the party or the coalition which has a majority in that assembly or parliament gets to form the whole government, with the opposition counting as nothing in, even if they have 49% of the seats. This first past the post at two levels has created a system in which those parties or those candidates who enjoy great visibility get an enormous privilege of getting elected, because people know that only one person will get elected in this constituency. So they don't vote necessarily for the person or the party that they consider best, if they feel that that candidate or party has virtually no chance of getting elected. So they vote for the least bad among those candidates that they feel have some chance of getting elected. And that judgment is made on the basis of the visibility of the candidates, and we know that visibility is a product of money. So this first past the post system has privileged the use of and given a huge advantage to those candidates and parties who have a lot of money. And therefore, we need to change this system, even in this representative democracy, to other systems which are there in many countries, such as proportional representation within a party list system. Now, in order to achieve all these objectives which I have just spelled out, having people of a certain kind with education directed towards these objectives, with healthcare where everybody has access to free basic healthcare, with more participatory democracy, not privileging money power by improving the system even of representative democracy, what are the systems and the institutions that need to be put in place? So the most important institution in a society and in our country is the judiciary. Now we need a judiciary not merely to decide disputes, but to enforce fundamental rights which have to be enforced primarily against the government. We also need a judiciary to ensure that the executive and the legislature function within the bounds of their powers and do their jobs. For this, we need a judiciary which is totally independent of the government. Unfortunately, in the recent past, we have seen that the judiciary, especially the highest judiciary, had ceased to be independent, and therefore we need to strengthen its independence. Now, one way to strengthen its independence is to prevent judges, especially of the High Court and the Supreme Court, from getting post-retirement jobs in which the government has any say whatsoever. Master of roster is a system by which the Chief Justice alone decides which case will be heard by which bench. And therefore, if the government somehow is able to control the Chief Justice, it is able to control that entire court, because all sensitive cases, all important cases from the government's point of view can be listed before judges of their choice, and this is what has been happening. Therefore, this power of deciding which case will be listed before which bench should not be exercised only by the Chief Justice, but by a collegium of minimum 5 senior judges. Thereafter, we need to improve the system of selecting judges. Earlier the government used to select judges, now the senior judges of the Supreme Court are supposed to select judges. But even this system has many flaws. One of them is that there is no transparency. The other is that there is no system at all. So there is no criteria which is fixed for selecting judges. There is no method for judging people on that criteria, and there is no transparency whatsoever. And this is happening because the senior 5 judges or 3 judges of the Supreme Court are very busy people with their own judicial work. Therefore, we need a full-time body which is completely independent of the government, but a full-time body which should be tasked with the job of selecting judges, especially of the higher judiciary. Then of course, we need to increase the number of courts in order that justice is dispensed quickly, and for that we need to effectuate the Gram Nyayalayas, which were envisaged to be the lowest courts at the block level, where at least ordinary disputes could be decided by following an informal procedure, that is, by people not even having to engage lawyers, which most people cannot afford in our country. The second most important institution, of course, one more reform that we need is to have judicial accountability. Today there is no accountability of the judiciary, with the result that there is a lot of corruption in the judiciary, and therefore we need a judicial accountability commission or a judicial complaints commission, a very high level body which is also completely independent of the government as well as of the judiciary, which can hold the judges to account, which can entertain complaints against judges and take action against judges who are errant in any particular way, who are corrupt or errant. Then the media is a very important institution which has also collapsed in this country. It has become completely subservient to the government, and the government is able to control the media by using various methods such as inducements, by way of giving government advertisements to its favored people in the media. Thereafter also using investigative agencies punitively in order to harass, intimidate and penalize those sections of the media that don't fall in line. So we firstly need to have some independent body which can ensure that government advertisements are not unfairly given, that they are given fairly to all sections of the media, and this should not be left only to the government. Again, a regulatory institution, it can be called the Media Council, which should be empowered to ensure that the media is not harassed by investigating agencies under the control of the government. Thirdly, we need to prevent large corporations from coming to control large sections of the media, which is also a phenomenon that we see today. So we need some kind of antitrust body to look into media monopolies and prevent media monopolies. And fourthly, we need to again this kind of media council, an independent media council, completely independent of the government and whose appointment is also independent of the government, should have the power to see and take action against misconduct by the media, because that is also a very serious problem today. Then there are all these investigative agencies like the CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, the NIA, the various police agencies, the Lokpal, etc., which need to be firstly made completely independent of the government and also made effective. There was a big Lokpal movement, after which Lokpal law was brought in. Lokpal has been created after a lot of dilly-dallying. Lokpal has been set up, but unfortunately the kind of people who have been selected are totally useless because the government had a decisive say in the selection of the members of the Lokpal, and they have appointed people who are useless. So therefore it enjoys no credibility, nobody goes to those. So for selecting all the heads and the important people in all these investigative agencies, we need to have a broad-based selection committee which is completely independent of the government. This should be there for all the investigative agencies, including the CBI, ED. For CBI chief, there is a somewhat independent agency, but for ED, for NIA, for various other investigative agencies, there is no proper system for ensuring that independent people are selected. The same problem is happening with the Election Commission also now, another very important institution which is supposed to regulate free and fair elections. Election Commission members are also appointed by the government and not by an independent body. So we need to have a broad-based independent body to select election commissioners. Same thing with the Comptroller and Auditor General. The selection is still left completely under the control of the government. We need to have again a broad-based independent committee to select the Comptroller and Auditor General. The Supreme Court had issued various directions about police reforms in the Prakash Singh case in 2006. There were a slew of reforms which had been directed, but unfortunately even 15 years down the line, that judgment has still not been implemented. We need to ensure that that judgment gets implemented. Take for example the last selection of the chairman of the National Human Rights Commission. A gentleman with the name of Justice Arun Mishra has been appointed as the chief of the National Human Rights Commission. Now this gentleman was known to be totally in favor of everything or anything that the government did. He never gave, during his tenure in the Supreme Court, never gave any significant judgment against the government, sided with the government on all important issues, virtually every important issue. He was allowed to overstay in his official bungalow for 9 months after his retirement by the government, contrary to all rules. Now that gentleman has been appointed as the chairman of the National Human Rights Commission, and therefore what do you expect from the National Human Rights Commission? So there are a large number of institutions which still need to be reformed. Some of the reforms which had been done, for example, a very good Right to Information Act was brought, and there were supposed to be independent information commissioners who were supposed to enforce that act. But today what we are seeing is that information commissioners are either not being appointed, those posts are being left vacant, or even when they are appointed, people who are close to the government are skydropped and appointed, or people who are ex-bureaucrats are being appointed. And really independent people are hardly being appointed. So in all these cases, we are seeing the need for strengthening the system of selection and appointment of people who man these institutions. Firstly, there must be much greater transparency in the system so that people can see how the persons are selected, what is the method by which people are being selected, that everybody has a fair chance to apply, etc., that the shortlisted persons' names are put out in the public domain before the appointments are finally made, so that people who know anything about them can send their comments, etc., about them. And this we are seeing across the board. In all these regulatory institutions, these kind of reforms need to be made. So these are the changes that we require in all these institutions to ensure that these institutions function for the purpose for which they were designed, namely to protect fundamental rights, to protect democracy, and to protect other values which are enshrined in the Constitution.